Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. We hope you've had a rich and meaningful day as you've explored with your colleagues the implementation of House Bill 2864. For our closing plenary, we're bringing together a couple leaders in our state to share their perspectives on the status and the future of the implementation of this House bill, and to also share their remarks on how we can show up as higher education leaders across the state. Our first speaker, or one of our speakers today, is going to be Dr. Yvette Alex-Assensoh. And Dr. Alex-Assensoh serves as the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion with the responsibility for collaboratively leading the University of Oregon's efforts to embed inclusion, equity, and diversity in its institutional practices, policies, and norms. Prior to joining the University of Oregon, she served as a tenured professor of political science and a dean at Indiana University in Bloomington. While there, she won outstanding research awards, secured national funding for her research projects, and served as a Fulbright scholar at the University of Zagreb in Croatia, and also led national committees focusing on issues of equity, diversity, teaching, excellence, and ethics. She's the co-author or author of 5 books, dozens of scholarly essays, and numerous journal articles. Dr. Tim Cook, who is also going to be reflecting with us today, has 30 years of experience working in higher education as an advisor, counselor, faculty member, and administrator. A native of Oregon City, he joined Clackamas Community College as its president in 2018. A first-generation college student, President Cook believes that community colleges are uniquely positioned to provide equitable opportunities for all students, in particular, the systematically non-dominant members of our community. He has a lifelong passion for helping college students achieve their dreams and works each day to remove barriers so students can be successful. Thank you both for joining us, and to our participants, as we hear reflections from Dr. Cook and Dr. Alex-Assensoh, you're welcome to begin dropping any questions you might have into the feature in Zoom. And after we've talked through a few prepared questions with our panelists, this will be a time for them to engage all of you all with the questions that remain at this point in the day. So to start us off, and Tim, you're welcome to share first, what does the higher education landscape look like in addressing the issue at the center of our summit today?
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you all for all of you that have hung out for the whole day and made it here to the end. I know it's, you're probably, many of you are like me, this isn't where you thought you'd see yourself when you got into higher education and working with students. And I know we're all navigating this, but I just want to acknowledge some of the challenges in mentally and otherwise staring at screens all day and trying to remain focused. And there's been a lot today. There's been a lot of discussion. Some of it I've felt a little overwhelmed just trying to take all that in. Some of it's been pretty inspiring. And just as we think about how we're going to move forward in this work, I wanted to reflect a little bit on what I heard from this morning. I kind of take us back to our first speaker, Dr. Macias, this morning, because I really found some of the things he said pretty relevant, pretty inspiring. His discussion about sense of belonging, I think is just really, really important as we think about that. And I was happy to hear that so many schools have that as some sort of a theme or something that they're working on. And then Trisha Brand at PCC was asking about, culturally subjective aspect around belonging. And, Dr. Macias went on to talk about the cultural validation and making sure that we're really working on that, making sure that people feel not only that they belong, but that we also really understand where they're coming from. And I really liked his discussion around solving real world problems and the examples that we have. And when we look to our surrounding communities, how we can partner with, in real ways with our communities for our students to have these examples about, right here in our communities about how they can fix some of these challenges and issues. And then, of course, the foster community collaboration and the need to be focused more toward teamwork and collaboration and mutual success rather than this, American ideal of individualism. And, and that we've all or many of us have been brought up to learn that it causes us to think differently about our assignments that we put forward, our policies that we put forward, and, how can we really set up systems to have groups and shared collaboration is, I thought, really, really wonderful that he mentioned that. And then just a couple more things that stood out for me as I wrote them down is that, these priorities are not add-ons, that we really have to find ways to integrate and embed this work if we're going to sustain it, and make sure that it's continuing on, so it's just not seen as another initiative or another thing that we have to do. Acknowledging that many of us have inadequate training in this work, and we need to continue to learn and grow wherever we can, and that unlearning pedagogy is a lifelong process. Boy, I underlined that about 3 times, to really, really think about that. And then we're going to make mistakes. And this idea about perfection versus vulnerability, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown and vulnerability, and it's something I really think about and read about a lot and think about there. So I think that's important to remember too, that we're not going to get this right. We're going to make mistakes, and we need to have some grace and some gratitude for those around us as we go through and do this work. So I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to talk about this from the community college kind of perspective, and I've got just a couple what I would call kind of framing slides. And as I think about from the community college here statewide and the work that we're doing here, I always like to start from the student perspective and get a little bit of an idea about who our students are. And so I went on to the HEX site this week because I wanted to just get an overall state view, a really, gosh, like a 50,000 foot state view of who our students are at the community colleges. And we've got a lot of them, 229,000 last year that were enrolled across our 17 campuses across the state, or 17 colleges across the state. Probably not a surprise, but maybe, many of them are women. And for me, it was interesting that at least 6.25 statewide did not report. And I don't know exactly what that means. I suspect that the binary nature of how we collect this information is problematic for some of our students. And so as you look at your own data locally, that might be something that you want to explore a little bit further. And then I also, just looked at the age. And for me, what's interesting here is not so much that we have non-traditional students, because I think we all have known that at community colleges, but how the high school students, or the under 18 category, seems to be growing overall statewide too, and what that kind of means both in opportunities and challenges. And so if I can get my slide to move. And then I looked at our the ethnicity and race across the state, and of course this will vary widely at your local in your local communities and your local institutions. So I think it's very interesting to start here, and then as you're doing this work to really hone in on this at your institutions. Here, of course, I was intrigued by the 53.4.1% white, and nationally, when you look at that, that's a number that is declining, and in some places in our state, probably right now, it's a minority number, or will be very soon. And then for me, what stands out here also is that almost 20% have not reported racial ethnicity, and that is also something I know when I looked at my own institution earlier this year. Large numbers there again that cause us to dig a little bit deeper into the data and learn a little bit more about who our students are when we're talking about how do we create cultural environments for our students, really understanding where they come from. But for me, when I look at data like this, I often ask the question, like, who are we missing, and what information aren't we getting? And so I start here with the student information, and I like to also think about the K-12 population and look at that data and see who the upcoming students are. And you may find this, I found it in my community, that the far more racially and ethnically diverse in the K-12. And then I also like to look at the outlining just the community itself, the county or counties, depending on where you are, and see what the makeup of that is and how much that matches your institution as well. Because I think all of that gives us some real information, again, in about our institutions. And then I just need to call this out. I've heard this kind of throughout the day today, but we are a very diverse state when you look at who we're serving and where we're at. And there's a number of opportunities and challenges that come along with this too. So this is a map of where all the community colleges and community college districts are across the state. And when you think about this and think about with the makeup of our 17 different institutions, there, we range anywhere from the Oregon coast and Tillamook Bay that are, a couple thousand students, I think, combined, to PCC that's, tens of thousands of students, and then anywhere in between. And then looking at, the rural, and Dr. Massey has talked about this too, because there was a question that came up about, how do we address, some of these rural issues that come through? How do we address commuter issues? And, and I'll get into this a little bit more after I, uh, in another question, but, how do we address some of these opportunities and challenges in these different parts of our state when we really have different demographics and different needs and the rest? So I kind of will defer, or I'll hand it over to Yvette to give the university perspective, and hope I'll stop sharing here because that's all I had there. But just kind of a little bit of an overview about who we are, and then we'll jump in a little bit more in a minute about some of the other challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. What I'd like to do is to thank Tim for that overview from the community college sort of perspective. To thank Dr. Alexander and OSU for leading our work with the summit, and for all of you who are here as well, and the work that you are doing to create the kind of cultural competency that we need in our institutions. And most thanks and gratitude go to our representative for her hard work and vision in bringing this about. In terms of what I'd like to share, I think Tim has done a great job of helping us to understand what the demographics look like for our institutions, the sort of context that we're facing. And what I'd like to do is to just share briefly, before we entertain questions that you have, about some of the principal concepts that I think are important for all of us to understand. In addition to what Tim said about the community college context, when you're talking about institutions like the University of Oregon, we also need to understand the important role that research and knowledge production play in this process, and the role that our students, both undergraduates and undergraduates, have in helping us to understand the way forward as well. But one of the central things that I think is important is to understand that HB 2864 is not just about compliance, because we know that our students, people across the state, have been asking for accountability on these measures for a while, for decades at least. And I think one of the issues is that we try to say, have we checked this off? Have we checked that off? But really the goal should be societal transformation. If we think about the role of higher education institutions as mechanisms for societal transformation, our representative has given us an opportunity to use our institutions more directly in that way. In terms of the context that Tim has already outlined, in terms of the demographic context, there are three other important contexts, I would say, as well, that we need to keep in mind. First is the legal landscape. And I do this not in a way to undermine the progress that's been made, but in a way of encouraging us not to allow legal concerns to stop the work that needs to be done. We often hear folks talking about First Amendment rights, academic freedom, as things that we need to protect. And I think we can use these arguments in favor of cultural competency, cultural agility as well. And so my sense is that we need to be innovative in how we use the law as a shield for this work, and not only as a way to deconstruct it. Second, I think we have to understand that our institutions, the people in them, the folks that we serve are at different levels of knowledge and experience with respect to these issues. And we need to shoot for the highest possible level, not the lowest, not what is uncomfortable, not what is comfortable, but what is uncomfortable. We need to grow into the grandest possibility and vision that we have for this work, as opposed to just hitting the basic marks. In other words, we need to think about, if we're talking about what does it take to get the A star in law school, or what does it take to get the A plus? That's where we should be aiming as institutions. And then finally, there's the intra-university cultural landscapes. What's going on with the academic side of the house, the administrative side of the house, what's going on with our community partners. All of those kinds of cultures and ways of approaching this work are going to be important. It's also important to realize that just as we're dealing with frontline workers in the pandemic, there are other frontline workers, especially with respect to this particular work. And we need to be careful to safeguard them and to protect them as well, because they're going to be key agents in driving this change. And what I've heard myself and from others who are doing this work is that 3 barriers exist currently. This notion of unrealistic expectations. Some people are just waking up to the reality that many others have been living in for all of their lives. And so we need to make sure that we're not holding folks accountable to change societal constraints and conditions that have existed and that folks have been comfortable to ignore because of their positionality, their race, their gender, their sexuality. And now there's the expectation, fix it overnight. That's unfair and it's unrealistic. Secondly, there's this notion of fatigue, that in addition to all that is going on for everyone else, diversity officers are expected to work around the clock to address these issues and to change on a dime. Because when you think about the work that diversity officers have to do, it's not just a mainline area of work, for example, all academics or all finance or all student life. It's all across the institution. And one is expected to be facile in understanding that work and how to address those problems across institutional lines. And so understanding the fatigue that your frontline diversity officers face is paramount to getting the work done. And then finally, this notion of moving beyond transaction. This is not a transactional effort. It is a transformational effort. And we owe a debt of gratitude to our representatives for ensuring that it's embedded in the institutional fabric of higher education. And we have to approach the work in that way. I think finally, or second to last, I would say that this work has to be aligned. And we saw the different types of ways that we had discussions today, and really are appreciative to Jeff for all of the ways in which he organized these panels and made sure everything ran so smoothly. But in addition to those that we focused on today, there are a host of other opportunities to align this work in the recruitment and onboarding that we do for our faculty and our staff, in the way that we conceive of and think about retention, in our professional development opportunities and student leadership and counseling processes. The list goes on, but I will say two that we often miss, especially in my neck of the woods, and that's research and discovery. And how it is that we embed this notion of cultural agility into the research that we're doing in ways that can also be profitable for the institution, not only in terms of a human capital sense, but also in terms of finances. And then finally, this notion of fundraising. There are donors who are interested in this work and seeing it done well. And we need to leverage our relationships in ways that build on this work. My final plea is that in moving beyond transaction into transformation, we need to remember that emotions and values play a large role in change, in institutional change, and societal change. We should not forget the impact of the 1960s and the role of nonviolent protest steeped in values of love, authenticity, courage, and empathy. Now, I do believe in nonviolent protests. I also believe that there is a time and a place for disruptive protest. After all, the founding of this country, going back to the Tea Party, was based on disruption. And to suggest that all kinds of protests need to be peaceful is deceptive, even based on the history of this country. But getting back to the main point, we need to understand that values are going to be important in driving this work. Are we engaged in this work with love, authenticity, courage, and empathy, both in the way that we think about ourselves as folks doing this work, the way that we connect with our students and our faculty and our staff and our alum, and the way that we use this work to bring about institutional transformation. Those values have to be central to the work that we do. And it's important to realize that our motives, whether our motives are just sort of checking off the box to get it done, or our motives are really driving institutional change, are really going to be important in determining what happens in the end. That's my presentation, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you.
Thank you both for launching us and giving us your overviews of both your experience today and maybe the work ahead. And again, I want to invite our participants, if you think you have a question that would bring discussion, rich discussion between Tim and Yvette, you can go ahead and start dropping those now. I have a couple questions to get us going. And so in addition to reflecting on anything you've said up to this point, who are your ideas about our partners in this work going forward? And we can start with Tim on that if you want. Oh, I think you're muted, Tim.
It seems like Tim might be frozen, so I'll just start off. I think one of our key partners, two, I would name it first, are our students, our graduate and our undergraduate students. They're going to have to lead this effort. We are doing this in part because of them, to launch them into careers where they could be leaders on a global stage. And I would say that our faculty and our staff are going to be key as well. Students experience many of these the issues that either launch them or that depress or disempower them in classrooms. And so faculty members have to be key partners. And I think that many faculty around the state are eager to help with this. They just need to know how, and they need to be incentivized to do the work effectively in terms of tenure and promotion processes, in terms of merit pay, in terms of professional development opportunities. I think we have willing partners, and we just need to make sure that we are providing the resources for them to do that work. At the same time, I will also say that we should not be spoon feeding anybody. And this is higher education after all, and we're all about the education as our business. And just as faculty and staff do reading and development on their own to learn what they have to do for their own disciplines and work, we expect them to do this similarly for this work as well.
Thanks for that, Yvette. Tim, are you with us?
I should be back with you now. My video's not coming back, and I think my Zoom was telling me that it was tired of being on all day. So I apologize for that. Yeah, and hopefully my video will come on here in just a second. And I apologize if I missed your remarks. So if I repeat some things too, I apologize to the audience. I did hear you say that we've got to start talking to the students when we look at partners, and I would wholeheartedly agree. I know from my perspective, students are often our best folks to get the word out and really show that there's a need for that. My own campus, there was some conversation about why do we need to do this work? What's the sort of the why for this? And having a climate survey where students were really directly responding to that and talking about some of the challenges that they're having in classes and on campus, and feeling safe or feeling like they belonged on campus was important information for our campus to hear as some of the reasons why. And then, other partners beyond that then is the staff and faculty. And I certainly always want to start with the passionate early adopters and the people that are really, engaged in this work and bring them along. But similar to the work on having climate surveys, hearing from faculty and staff about their experience is also really important. And I remember talking to a long-term faculty member about why this work was so critical for the college. And and the comment I heard from the faculty members was, we don't have these issues here at Clackamas Community College. And I politely said, well, I would encourage you to read through some of the reports from the climate survey, and specifically our students of color and our faculty staff of color, but also our GLBTQ students, and where they how they're feeling about, thank you, now I'm back on, about where they're feeling welcome or not welcome. And even to the point where we had, from a gender perspective, we were looking in our, women reporting not feeling safe in certain conversations on campus, or not, not feeling that they had an opportunity to be heard, was a way to bring in more partners. And then, and I think, in higher ed in Oregon, we're pretty small, right? When you look at all the colleges and everybody who we have. So knowing that we've got resources at other community colleges that are 4 years, and I would hope to see more partnerships and more events like this, where we can really collaborate across higher ed, across the entire state, because I think we can, have a lot of really value in sharing beyond that. And so, and then the other piece I would say, of course, is partnering with our external businesses and nonprofits and everybody that can help us have these larger conversations and really support it in our own communities is critical.
Thanks to you both. A question from one of our participants that I think pairs well with your reflection. What are some good ways to encourage students to be involved, especially in the community college setting?
Yeah, so I'm going to reflect back on that kind of the real world experience, and and again acknowledging that each of our communities is different, and we'll have different opportunities and different perspectives, but helping engage our students and connecting in whether it's related to STEM, or whether it's a career and technical program that they're in. Looking and finding ways to get involved that way, I think, is really important. I know, Representative Alonso Leon, I believe, is still on this call. One of the pieces that we've done with success recently is encouraged our students to get involved legislatively around this type of work. And so we bring them to Salem when we used to actually, go places face to face. And now we bring them into conversations about this type of work. One of probably the easiest pieces was reaching out and asking for students who were interested, engaged in this work. Over the summer, I did a number of one-to-one conversations with students from a diverse variety of students, just to get their experience on campus. And I wasn't sure how many would want to talk to the president of the college, but I was happy that about 15 of them signed up, and we had conversations. That then I asked them to continue on and do some panels with our faculty and staff, and was a good way to get them involved too.
Thanks for that, Tim. Is there anything you'd want to add to involving students in this work?
I think students, especially Generation Zers, are such good leaders of themselves. They actually help us to lead better. But I would say removing barriers that allow them to empower other students. So the things that the normal sort of get-ups that they do on campus, any barriers that we have to those kinds of opportunities for students to engage and encourage others are probably things that we can do to help them.
Great. The next question that comes in from our participants, in direct response to Yvette, your reflections on peaceful versus disruptive protests, they go on to share, some have described our current president as disruptive. Seems that we have two disruptive forces clashing with each other. Any advice, particularly as it relates to the implementation of HB 2864? In other words, not everyone, even on individual campus, feels or thinks the same way or accepts the importance of this work. Any comments or reflections from y'all?
Yeah, I think that HB 2864 is not alone in inspiring a diversity of perspectives and opinions. And that's why it's important to have an alignment about what the institution believes and where it stands on HB 2864 and go from there. It thanks to our representative, it's a law. Thanks to the work that we are here to do, we know that we need to get it done. And while people may have different opinions about its utility, those should that should not be our primary concern. It's like a student who comes to a university and says, why do I have to take political science or English? I'm majoring in chemistry. I don't need to know this. Yeah, you do. And it's important for the institution to set those standards and allow folks to do it. Now that's my sort of get in line and do it at the end of a very long day. And also at the end of at a time when, frankly, we shouldn't have to be dealing with these questions about whether or not people agree, so should we do it? I mean, our nation is partially in the shape that it is in now, historically, because we've allowed certain things to be based on whether or not people feel it's right or wrong. And when it comes to other people's humanity and the respect that we should have for those should not be open to vote by opinion. It should be something that our institutions uphold.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just add just briefly on that, because I think that was beautifully said. I think from a practical perspective, our missions are really serving our communities and everybody in our communities. And it's such a tough time now to have any sort of a civil conversation about anything. It just even starting that off is a challenge. But I keep coming back to, our goal is to improve people's lives and help them become learners. And to the extent that we can really bring that in, and for many of us, the issue of socioeconomic and poor students or poor communities where we're doing what we can to give people real skills where they can gain is something that resonates with some people, that we do that. Certainly, the issues around Black Lives Matter and some of the other pieces that are more getting a lot of more attention right now in the executive order that we need to acknowledge and work through are volatile. But I agree with Yvette. I mean, we still need to hit those head on. I think the HB 2864 does give us some reason to do that. But beyond that, these are important pieces of our institutions and our community. And I love that LACE acronym, and we have to have courage. We have to step forward and into this and talk about the reasons why that we want equitable outcomes for all of our students and everybody in our community, and that benefits everybody. And so we should all be standing up for that, even in the midst of all of this craziness going on nationally and everything else.
Thanks to you both. Another question from our participants is your thoughts about whether the HEC can support curation and sharing of guidance and resources related to House Bill 2864 and its implementation.
Yes. Yes. I think yes. To the extent that we can, again, share and support each other and look at promising practices, and that the HEC can be really a coordinating body to do that, I think is really helpful. I was in Washington State for a long time before I came back home to Oregon, and I'm really glad to be home back in Oregon. But one of the pieces I liked about the system in Washington State, and it was the 2 years and the 4 years would get together and work, and there was every year there was a conference for students of color across the state where we talked about issues and supported each other and brought that together. Every year there was a conference for staff and faculty of color where they could get together and talk about issues and support each other. And there were there was support that came out of that. There was work that came out of that, but there was a lot of really good outcomes in the sense that people could reach out during the year and support. And so, that's beyond a little bit what what you asked for here around the HEC, but I think to the extent that HEC can bring us together and support notions like this, events today, I hope we do things like this every year, and and have more opportunities to engage. And at some point when we're back together again, we're able to see each other.
I totally agree.
Keeping it concise. Thanks for that. Our next question from our participants: how can we best support under-resourced Oregon educational institutions to collectively enhance the implementation of House Bill 2864?
I think one of the things that I've always loved about the state of Oregon is that it's a scrappy place. It's not a state that's teeming with lots of resources, but people here make do, and they live lives that are filled with lots of inspiration. And I think that we need to bring that scrappiness to this work, and figure out how to embed the priorities of HB 2864 as they align with our respective campuses in the work that is ongoing. Because we know that what we don't want to do with HB 2864 is to create sideline processes. And in some ways, the institutions that are least resourced, that have the least opportunity to establish parallel processes, are better positioned to do the work in the way that I think our representative intended and that institutions need. Because what that means is then the curriculum work will have to be embedded in the existing processes. The leadership work will have to be embedded in those processes, the financial work. And so that's what we're supposed to be doing anyway. I think the only thing that may be in short supply, I think with all of us, is energy, right? We're all exhausted. But when we think about what can be different, if we use the native understanding of 7 generations, and if we understand the 400 years of oppression that have existed in this country around these issues, there's a lot of work to do. And perhaps that work and the vision of what we can create together by doing things differently might be enough to propel us beyond the limited tangible resources to understand that we have emotional and value-laden resources that will help us to get the work done.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to a rural college consortium that we have with 10 of our community colleges that gets together every month, and they've been doing that since 2012. And these are, again, our small colleges, our rural colleges that don't have a lot of resources. And so they're working together to try to share some of the work. They're creating templates that help with this. I think we're always going to be somewhat constrained. I think that's just the reality of our lives and our business. And so anywhere that we can collaborate and learn from each other is helpful and support each other. So I think that rural college is a good example. That consortium is a good example of where we can do more of this at large. But I will also say, if this, and this was in the remarks this morning, if this is another sort of initiative that's not embedded in our work, and I think, Yvette, you were just saying this, that it's not embedded in in our instruction, in our strategic plan and the rest of it, where it's part of our work, then it's going to be seen as a resource drain in terms of finance, in terms of people power and mental energy and the rest. It has to be integrated into our college work for it to be sustainable and for it to move on. Yes, I would love more resources. I know we have a representative here and others. I would love more resources. I will not turn that down, but I'm also very practical, and I know that in order to move this forward, we have to make do with what we have, and we also have to demonstrate why this matters and why it's important, so that people see, oh, I want to get involved, and I want, whether it's grants or whether it's state support, I want to fund this.
Thanks to you both. Another question from one of our participants. We often talk about the importance of the commitment from leadership. As leaders, what do you need to actualize this work on your campuses?
Me to jump in on this one or start anyway, or do you want to go?
I think the one of the things that's most important is we've talked about resources, right? But I think one of the most important things that we can give to folks doing this work is a sense of trust and respect. Trust that you have the institution's heart and commonwealth and well-being in mind, that you are capable of doing the work, that you bring expertise to the work, and respect for the work as a professional responsibility and something for which you study and do research and use evidence to engage. And too often with chief diversity officers, there is this sense that, oh, because you're Black or you're a woman or you belong to the LGBT community or you're disabled, that somehow this is just inherent knowledge. And that, you know, what you're doing is easy. Anybody could do it. And that's a problem. And when you have folks who take you for granted and who make it seem like the work that you're doing could be done by anyone, that undermines the sense of effectiveness that leaders can bring to this work. So the good news is that while money is an important thing, that respect and trust are two things that money can't buy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to go back to my statement about vulnerability earlier. You know, I, as a white male president of a college, I have quite a bit of power and privilege. And so I oftentimes feel a little bit uncomfortable in situations like this, talking about issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. At the same time, I, to that point of not expecting, whether it's, you know, a Black DEI leader or a woman or, you know, somebody else to kind of do all this work for me, I learned over time that it's my responsibility to do this work. And I've said now that I'm in this president's role that it's my duty and privilege. And so that term of really respect and listening, it's my duty and privilege to learn on my own and do the work on my own, but then also to use this privilege and power to make sure that it's, you know, that it's making a difference, that I can, you know, talk about this to the entire campus about why this is important and why we're doing this work. I can come out and make statements about why this is, you know, this work is critical and where we're going next with it. And so those are pieces that I feel I have a duty to move forward, and then also an opportunity to really make some changes there. And I try to look to mentors and leaders who've done this work, I think, really well, and learn from that and learn ways that maybe I can be a force for good in that way.
Thank you both. Perhaps an extension of this conversation, as leaders, as a president and vice president respectively, what do you need from your DEI leaders to be able to take action? They go on to pose questions like, how do you make decisions on resource allocation and policy approval? What would benefit our causes? And what can we give to our presidents and vice presidents to make them feel confident in backing us?
Jeff, may I ask you to repeat that question? I'm sorry, I was distracted and I didn't hear it.
Yeah, no, I got it. So as leaders, in your roles as president and vice president, what do you need from your DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders on your campuses to be able to take action? How do you make decisions on resource allocation and policy approval? What would benefit our causes? And what can we give to our presidents to make them feel confident in backing us?
Since I am VPEI, I think Tim should go first in answering that question because that's the question is posed to someone in his capacity.
Yeah, I'm going to pose a couple things or post a couple of links in the chat too, just some articles about this. One is from working with your board, because I know in talking to some of my colleagues, there's some challenges in different parts of the state with having support from our boards and how they feel about this work. And then there was another article from Inside Higher Ed, just that was offered some more practical suggestions for working with DEI in communities across the state. And I shared this with the community college presidents anyway, but I would like to give those to everybody. So I'll post those in just a minute. For me, I think opportunities to really collaborate and sort of, make sure that we're all kind of working together on this, whether that's, a statement. I know I spent some time last year working together on a statement around Black Lives Matter that, it came out from me, but I worked with the DEI group to really formulate that statement. And I think it was stronger because of that. When we look at, the initiatives, the policies, the work that we need to do, making sure that we're using an equity lens to inform that work, but that we're all collaborating on that, because that will drive, those conversations will drive policy, they'll drive resource allocation. Again, it gets back to this, if it's standalone, it's not going to work. But as leaders, if what, the president's leadership of the college working with DEI to talk about what is needed to move that forward and integrate that in will help. And so it takes some conversations with the DEI leadership or the DEI councils or committees that you have and the leadership of the college. But I think those are critical to have so that everyone's on the same page.
Any VP wisdoms you want to throw out there, Yvette? No pressure.
I think that unless presidents understand that the work of the president is to institutionalize equity and inclusion into the mainstream of campus life, we will continue to be dealing with these questions because too often, around the nation, this is a higher education problem. This is not an Oregon problem or a University of Oregon problem alone, but it's a national problem of vision and perception of what the work of diversity is. It's the 1950 model to have diversity as fire insurance. We want you to stand in front of us when the fire starts, and we want you to put it out. The most effective view of diversity is how can we ensure that we are equipping the vice presidents across the units, the deans, with an understanding of equity and inclusion that builds capacity for this work in their own units. And when they have that work, they will be coming to the vice president of equity and inclusion or to the person of equity and inclusion and asking for their expertise, as opposed to the diversity officer always begging, knocking on doors. Have you thought about this? What about me? That's old. It's tired, and it needs to stop. And if it doesn't stop, despite the efforts that are being made today, we're going to continue to have these conversations because the people with the power won't do what needs to be done. It's not the diversity officer's job to fix the institution. It's the diversity officer's job to help the president and the vice presidents and deans to build capacity for change. But they can't do that themselves. And I am blessed with a very effective team of colleagues across the university, not only those who work in the division, especially those, but also people outside. But unless we get that into our heads, and not just because we're having a problem or a legislation or a crisis, we'll be dealing with this all the time.
Couldn't agree more. And one of my biggest concerns was that because we have yet to hire our chief diversity officer, and when I started the college a couple of years ago, that was the first ask. One of the first asks was let's hire a chief diversity officer. And I said, if we don't have a structure, if we don't have a strategic plan that's going to involve the college and the work of the college, everything's going to fall on that position and that person. The expectation is that they're going to solve all of our problems, and it's a setup for failure. And I just, it has to be all of our problems, from leadership on and all the way down. And that problem's not the right word for it, but it has to be all of our work, from leadership all the way down across the college. And that, I think, is the leader's responsibility to make sure it's embedded in there. But anytime you put something like this on a position or an office to fix all that, we're asking for trouble.
Thank you for those reflections. Just for our participants to know, as a gift to all of you, both Tim and Yvette would like for us to end a little bit early in honor of the time we've spent in front of our screens, and not only the time you spent today, but just the acknowledgement of all the things we're weathering in our lives larger than this. And so I would like to ask you one last question to round out your reflection. And it's one that you all prepared in advance of our conversation today, which is, 5 years from now, if we are successful, what will that success look like?
You want to start with this one?
Yeah. So when we think about the purpose of our Representative Leon's legislation, I think that one of the purposes, right, was so that folks in the university, especially our students, would have a sense of belonging. And we have to understand that belonging is not just the absence of harm, but it's actually a sense that there is a place for one's culture, one's presence. So being in a room where you're the only one who looks like you, whether the folks there are nice or not, sends a message that you don't belong. And that's a societal issue as well as it is an institutional issue. So one of the things is that I hope we'll have years from now is that folks will feel a sense of belonging, not just because of the absence of harm, but because there are more people like them in the institution. Because the cultural competency and the agility that folks will learn will change admissions processes. It will change fundraising standards. They'll change the way we hire folks. And all of those things will lead to retention and greater recruitment of folks, so that the university looks much more like our society at large. And then I'm hopeful that the students that we train and who train us, frankly, will go on to be leaders on a global stage who actually transform the way we work and look and think as a society. I'm talking not only about America, but the world at large. The students that we have are just brilliant. The fact that they can do and be in the context that we've put them in suggests that if we were able to remove many of those barriers, they would be unimaginably great. And so I'm hoping, just as a starter, as a teaser, those two things. And I imagine that those in the audience and those who are watching with us have their own visions and versions of what that may look like. But those are just two from my perspective.
And we didn't collaborate on our answers before this, but I had belonging as my first as well. And so, I love to dream and envision the future. And so when we talked about this question, in 5 years from now, what would that look like? And I had that same thought, that if we can have a place that really reflects our communities and where people really see themselves and they can be successful and go on, is just something I really think is worth all of our work and all of our effort. And so I echo that 100 more than 100%. The other piece I would add is, I want equitable outcomes for all of our students. And, I really want to, 5 years from now, I really want to be able to point and show that everybody that comes through our doors, and there's even an issue there, that we're making sure that our doors are open wide enough so that everybody can come, because right now, not everybody's getting to us, but that we can assume in 5 years people are getting to us, and then that we have set up our systems And we've become student ready institutions that you really are poised and remove barriers. And, the movement we're looking at community colleges is guided pathways, and, and removing barriers and making sure that we've got clear paths for our students so that, everybody can achieve their goals. Why that's exciting for me, in all the years I've worked in colleges, is that the places where you wouldn't expect necessarily, places like Tennessee and Kentucky that you wouldn't come up in your mind about really having equitable outcomes, do. And they've been doing this work and really have clear data that demonstrate that if we can, change our institutions and remove barriers to our institutions, that we can be places really where people achieve their dreams and go on there. So that's the part that keeps me kind of getting up every day and, and tackling this.
Thank you both for that reflection and for all of the wisdom that you've shared. Tim, I want to extend this metaphor of opening our doors to others. My hope is that one of the many outcomes of our time at the summit today was that across institution, across state agency, perhaps our doors are a little bit more open to one another, that we're able to build relationships and familiarity and rapport, so that as many of us go off to work in isolation, to weather the ambivalence and the loneliness, the uncertainty of this work, there's a greater sense of familiarity that we can pick up the phone, send an email, or fire up the Zoom to connect with people who share our passion and our engagement with this work. And so thank you for being a part of creating that warmth and rapport across the state. To close this out for today, I want to thank all of the speakers who presented, both to Yvette and to Tim, but also Rudy Ann, to Representative Alonso Leon and Sam Musias. And I want to thank our volunteers who facilitated our collaboration sessions and our note takers. I have particular gratitude to our colleagues at Oregon State Conference Services who made everything run smoothly today. Thank you so much for your hard work. A lot of gratitude for our action team, volunteers across the state who came together to vision and execute this summit for you all, and certainly to our participants. So for bringing your own questions, bringing your own stories, and it made this whole experience come together. So lastly, what you all can expect from this experience is that I'm going to get to work compiling all the notations from the collaboration sessions, questions that have been submitted in our plenary, and to work with the action team to distill all of this into a summary report. That report will be shared back with you as participants, and it will also be delivered to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission with recommendations on our path forward. So with that, thank you all so much for your time and attention, and we hope to connect in another capacity very soon.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.